Hello, everyone. Welcome. Welcome all. And thank you for joining Women's Way for closing the gender wealth gap forum on freedom, joy, and belonging. I am Diane Corman-Levy, the Chief Disruptor at Women's Way, and I'm really delighted that you've all decided to join us for the next 90 minutes. I know I would wait for folks to sign on. I would appreciate you taking the poll, which is going to pop up on the screen. We always want to know if this is your first time attending a Women's Way event. So if you could just answer that question, we would greatly appreciate it. And thank you. So again, welcome. I know people are coming on and joining us. So today's forum is a part of a multi-year series whose purpose is to educate different stakeholders about the drivers of the gender wealth gap and action steps each of us can take to help close the gender wealth gap. Since October 2020, we have conducted 27 forums that address different drivers of the gender wealth gap, such as strengthening the early childhood education sector, decreasing gender and racial disparities in healthcare, increasing access to affordable housing, and eliminating the student debt crisis. During 2025, excuse me, we explored how we can create a future where all women and gender nonconforming people have the stability, care, and opportunities they need to thrive. Each session spotlighted the change makers and organizations working across 4 dimensions of the Gender Wealth Framework, a tool developed by Women's Way to promote dignity, equity, and joy in our communities. So today's session, we'll explore the 5th and final dimension of the Gender Wealth Framework, freedom, joy, and belonging. All women and gender-expansive people deserve to feel valued, connected, and free to dream. Just imagine a world where everybody can find joy in spaces that respect and honor their lived experiences. But how do we get there? Today, you will hear from organizations building community around art, identity, and tradition on their approaches to bringing belonging to Philadelphia. You will have opportunities to ask questions to the speakers via the Q&A button located at the bottom of your screen, and we will do our best to address as many of your questions as possible. Closed captioning is enabled. If you do not want to see closed captioning, you can click Hide CC at the bottom of your screen. Now, the chat is also enabled, and so please share your comments during the session. We love to hear how people are responding to the conversations during these sessions. But to create a safer space for all of us to engage in honest and challenging conversations, we ask each of you to abide to the session norms listed in the chat box. Finally, we will record the session and make it available for you and others to view after today's session. We will also send you a list of resources related to today's topic and a survey to evaluate the session. We deeply value your input as we work to continually improve these educational forums. So Kelly Sheard, Chief Strategy Officer, and I are going to spend the next few minutes providing an overview of the economic state of women and children, our new theory of change, and key concepts related to the Gender Wealth Framework. So if you could advance to the next slide, please. So this is our vision statement, our starting point, what we dream of when we envision the future. And this could look like a wider community that comes together to ensure access to abortion and gender-affirming care, the opportunity to grow a family and not sacrifice a career, or post-incarceration resources to stabilize re-entering citizens. Go to the next slide, please. So our mission is why we exist and how we achieve our vision. Here we're talking about disrupting oppressive systems such as white supremacy and patriarchy, and strengthening alternative models that will lead us to a brighter, more equitable, and joyful future. That is our mission at Women's Way. Next slide, please. So we know that those who are living paycheck to paycheck and are not able to cover an unexpected $400 expense are predominantly women and gender nonconforming individuals. The region's largest demographic group living in poverty are women ages 25 to 34. Nationally, straight cis men have the lowest poverty rate, and transgender people have the highest poverty rate. And there are reasons for this. But related to these stats is the gender wealth gap, which you see on here, which is worsening and is much larger than the pay equity gap. The gender wealth gap is a stronger indicator of economic insecurity than the pay gap, as it influences the ability to weather current financial challenges as well as save and invest for the future. For every dollar a white man owns in material wealth, women overall own just 32 cents, and this is not improving. When considering the racial demographics of the same statistic, Black and Latino women own just 1 penny. And currently, there is no really good data on the wealth gap for transgender individuals, an area that needs to be researched. Next slide, please. So the problem, like racial injustice, climate change, and world hunger, the gender wealth gap is a systemic issue, and it will require systemic answers. It is therefore important to examine the design of systems that consistently produce this outcome. We know that systems are not natural or inevitable. They are constructed by decisions and choices. Our dominant economic system is designed to embed what we call racialized capitalism, wealth supremacy, and heteropatriarchy into its very function, leading to a growing gender wealth gap. So it's really important to pause and examine these theoretical frameworks as they help explain how and why marginalized genders have inadequate access to and limited experience of wealth. So let's start with racialized capitalism, which is capitalism at its core and is focused on private ownership of property, where one class of people control and profit from the labor of the subordinate class. The social and economic structure of capitalism reflects a system of relationships of domination, and boy, are we seeing this now across the world, among categories of people. In the United States, that domination is often racialized. Wealth supremacy is an economic system that believes wealthy people matter more than others. It is a cultural and political processes and attitudes by which wealthy people accumulate and maintain prestige, power, and privilege. Our economic system protects the extreme hoarding of the privileged class by supporting and enabling strategies of extraction and exploitation. And I want to emphasize that a lot of wealth is created by creating debt among others and by creating debt among the majority. And there's a great book on wealth supremacy by Marjorie Kelly. If you want to read more about it, I highly recommend that book. And then there's heteropatriarchy, is a logic that justifies the subordination of all those who are not heterosexual cisgender men. Anything outside of this constructed norm is seen as deviant and unworthy, and therefore dehumanization and oppression of other genders becomes justified. So yes, that's a big problem. So how do we challenge this? Next slide, please. So to challenge and disrupt dominant systems that perpetuate and worsen gender inequities, we must understand the conditions that keep systems in place. And this is what this slide is showing. So this diagram shows 6 conditions that keep a problem in place. The explicit conditions include policies, practices, and resource flows, such as government, institutional, and organizational rules, regulations, and priorities, activities of institutions, coalition, networks, and other entities targeted to improving social and environmental progress, and how money, people, knowledge, information, and other assets are allocated and distributed. And I think we focus a lot on that because that's more explicit and we understand it and see it more. The semi-explicit conditions are relationships and connections and power dynamics, which are the quality of connections and communications occurring among actors in a system, and the distribution of decision-making power, authority, influence among individuals and organizations. And finally, the implicit conditions, which we really don't see and many times don't think about, are mental models which are deeply held beliefs and assumptions and taken for granted ways of operating that influence how we think, what we do, and how we talk. So mental models are shaped and influenced by narratives, which are the stories we tell and the mindsets, beliefs, and ideas we hold that help us organize our thinking and explain how the world works. When it comes to the gender wealth gap, we often find harmful narratives that prop up oppressive power structures and enable inequitable outcomes. Next slide. Next slide, please. Oh, thank you. So if you think about what I just said about the conditions of system change, our theory of change is related to this. And this is really what it will take to realize our mission and ultimately our vision. So we know that gender inequities are deeply rooted in long-standing systems of white supremacy and capitalism, and we have to tackle them at the root in order to see changes. We can't only treat the symptoms of inequities and not address the root. So one of the things we do a lot of is narrative change, because in that previous slide, I said narratives help shape our mental models, and mental models help shape of how we think about things, how we understand things, the decisions we make. So we invest in narrative change that will shift conversations about gender and economic equity. And we also build the capacity of our partners to lead and invest with equity. Next slide, please. And I think something is very important to us when we define wealth. It's a much broader definition of the more capitalistic form of wealth, which is assets minus liabilities. When we define wealth in our work, we use a definition pioneered by friends at the Maven Collaborative. So we socialize this concept because it refers to more than material wealth, which is just one aspect of wealth. Subjective well-being pertains not only to individual, but also to community. We are creating the conditions and context for subjective well-being to be met just as much as we're advocating for material wealth. So to achieve these forms of wealth, the practices and policies that deny and limit the accumulation of wealth and the extraction of wealth must be addressed head on. So I think so. We'd love you to just read this definition of wealth and why we're talking about freedom and joy and belonging. It's a critical component of what we mean by wealth. So I'm going to pass this on to Kelly Sheard, who's our Chief Strategy Officer at Women's Way. Thank you.
Hi there. You can see and hear me? Okay, great. Next slide. The gender wealth framework provides a way to capture the nuance of an experience of wealth that is most relevant for folks of a marginalized gender experience. It's a roadmap for our network to understand and measure whether their work is moving towards closing the gender wealth gap. Next slide. This is super tiny. Don't worry, I'll tell you more about it. The framework, which is pictured here, also emphasizes the importance of thinking about dominant narratives, meaning the stories we tell about how we got here, who deserves what in order to be well, and how our society should work. We also call attention to how these narratives inform the design and outcomes of the current economic system and how it impacts marginalized genders. For more information, check out the Gender Wealth Framework report linked in the chat. Next slide. The Gender Wealth Framework expands how we think about and measure abundance and success. The framework encompasses three components. Material well-being measures traditional notions of economic stability and provides point-in-time assessments of one's financial portfolio. Measurements here focus on access and affordability of resources. Lived experience measures the felt experience of abundance in communities and institutions. System conditions and context acknowledges and highlights the historical and current specificities of wealth inequality by examining the conditions that are keeping us from making progress towards more liberatory futures, things such as mindsets, power dynamics, policies, and resource flows. Next slide. From here, the gender wealth framework is focused on wealth in 5 dimensions. In today's session, we'll be focused on freedom, joy, and belonging. Next slide. Going deeper, freedom, joy, and belonging is defined by the following indicators of success. Feeling free to pursue joy and leisure and being able to find wellness communities that are free from structural biases. Feeling treated with dignity and respect and having lived experiences honored, valued, and validated by people and institutions. Being free to make choices and exercise self-determination, and feeling connected to your communities and being able to shape the community. Next slide. Our goal with this session is to introduce you to organizations and people who are piloting innovative solutions in the freedom, joy, and belonging space. We want our network to understand what's possible as we work together to create futures of abundance that work for us all. To that end, I'm pleased to welcome our moderator, Jos Duncan Asé, into the space. Jos will introduce our panel of changemakers into the webinar. Welcome, Jos.
Hello, hello. I'm trying to get myself off camera here. If the host could just let me in, that would be great. Okay, here we go. Let's see. Okay, hello. Hello, everyone. It is so nice to be here. I am happy to welcome our panelists today. And so I'd love to ask you, as you all come into the room, if you could just introduce yourself and tell us a bit about how your work relates to freedom, joy, or belonging. Let's start with Jasper Liem, who's the executive director of the Addict Youth Center. Hey,
Hey
Jasper.
everyone. Ooh, I feel like I did this like cool fade in. Hi, I'm Jasper Liem. I go by they and he pronouns interchangeably. Uh, and I am the executive director at the Attic Youth Center. And I love this question because, what we do is we serve youth who are 14 through 23, the age out at 24. I say 24-ish because, we never leave them high and dry. But you know, I think that at the root of everything we do is finding a place of community and joy and finding joy within community. And so, yeah, I'm so here for this right now. It's so good to see you, Joss.
Yes, good to see you too. Let's welcome Candace McKinley, who's the lead organizer at the Philadelphia Community Bail Fund.
Hi, everyone. I'm Candace McKinley, lead organizer of the Philadelphia Community Bail Fund. And yeah, the Bail Fund we started in May 2017, out of an effort to raise money to bail out Black mothers and caregivers for Mother's Day. And so when we came together, we picked the name Community Bell Fund really purposefully, and our logo is in red because we wanted that to be central to like all the work that we do, that it was something that was community led and focused, and that our purpose was to also build community. And yeah, it's saying that like community building and like bringing people together and fighting isolation that comes with being incarcerated pre-trial is sort of at the core of a lot of the work that we do.
Thank you so much, Candace. And lastly, but not leastly, we'll welcome Kiera Smalls, who's the executive director of the Running Industry Diversity Coalition. Welcome, Kiera.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm really excited to be here as well. Uh, I am the executive director of the Running Industry Diversity Coalition. I use she, her pronouns. I like to say I'm based in the great city of Philadelphia. And I was born and raised in Philly, and a lot of my work is in like movement-based activities right now. How do we get more people moving their bodies through running? Specifically. And so I had a run club here in Philadelphia called City Fit Girls for many, many years, where we got anywhere between 40 to 60 women running with us throughout the city. A lot of them were newbies, and then some of them went on to complete races. And now with my work with RADC, we're working to help more people into the sport and also help more people work in the sport or have ownership in the sport. So excited to be here.
Great, great. Well, I'm looking forward to diving into the conversation. But before I ask a question to the panel, I'd love to just say for everyone who's in the room or in the Zoom, I just want to invite you to be present in your body for this conversation. I mean, the audacity of Women's Way to have a conversation at the start of the year about freedom, joy, and belonging. Those are words that, we have this opportunity to be here together and to actually have an experience together. So, as I ask the panelists these questions about joy and belonging, I just want to invite all of you who are here with us to really take it in, to maybe pull out your journal. Maybe some of these questions will resonate with you in a way that makes you want to change a personal practice or meditate or look up an organization. So even though you're not answering verbally, maybe you're just kind of searching your soul or taking a mental note, and that way you can be an active participant as well. So thank you to everyone here. With that, I'd love to ask the first question, which is, how do you even define joy? How do you claim it? Is it a personal practice of yours? And if so, well, if so, please describe it. And if not, what stands in your way? Anyone want to start us off?
I can start.
Okay.
Uh, for me, joy is having a sense of belonging. And there are so many ways that either I make it possible for myself or there's organizations and experiences that help make it possible. And then there's so many ways that I'm not able to do that as I would like to. So for me, belonging, dignity, um, discovering what's possible in my body or what's going on around me. That's what comes up for me.
Great. Anyone else? And can people pop words in the chat? How do you define joy?
Not gonna lie, I had to bring these questions to therapy. So, but for me, joy is a lot about what refills my cup, right? Like I love this work. I love doing movement work. I've been doing LGBTQ stuff like since I came out and as a teenager. And so for me, it's just like as much as I love doing the work, it also can be draining, right? It's just sort of naturally stressful, especially this past year and a day. And so joy is I'm an extrovert. So joy is what refills my cup with especially when I'm in community and with other folks, when I have that sense of belonging. Um, yeah, and it just, I think it's a lot like power. I don't think it's something that can be taken,
Hmm.
but I think it is something we can lose.
Thank you. Thank you, Jasper. Candace, how about you?
Yeah, I remember thinking about these questions like last week, and it was all of them are really hard and challenging for me. Just because, to be honest, joy isn't something I deliberately think about a lot and try to foster. And so, when defining joy, I think it's something you have to be deliberate about and foster.
Mm,
And
mhm.
joy to me is like I think a celebration and also gratitude. Um, and just an example, we had a staff meeting earlier today with the Bail Fund, and we're trying to examine our work in mutual aid and support. And instead of starting off, what's going wrong, what should we fix, what's hard about this, we started off being like, what has gone well? What do we want to celebrate? And we shared a lot of the stories of the folks that we have been able to help who have had good outcomes. And that really changed like the the atmosphere and the way that we're approaching it because we're thinking of, oh, let's like share this gratitude for like what we have been able to do and celebrate that, put that forward. And for me, that's part of like joy. And like you said, that this work is really draining and like that helps to like fill the cup,
Mm.
instead of being overwhelmed by all the stuff against us, to celebrate those moments when good things are happening.
That's beautiful. So, gratitude, belonging, there's some great words also in the chat around finding community, having a full cup, laughter, family. When we think about just where we are in the world and how the world is working, I was actually talking to an elder the other day, and he's like, it's fascinating, how many people have depression these days. I think it's because everyone is operating so individually. He says, back in my day, you know how the elders are. Back in my day, we just had to go outside. We just had to walk somewhere to talk to somebody, and that forced us to deal with whatever we were dealing with in community. So I don't know if there was any fact to that, but it definitely led me to thinking about the individuality, the loneliness that people are experiencing. And there was even a report that was from Dr. Vivek Murthy, who was the Surgeon General in 2023. The report was a report on loneliness and isolation. And it stated that people were feeling like, if they left tomorrow, people might just, post a sad emoji on social media and keep scrolling. They just felt, very lonely and sad. So with this isolation now being framed as a public health issue, what does connection and belonging actually feel like in your community? Like we know that's how you define joy, but how do we create that in this environment where so much of what we do is actually done individually, you know?
Uh, I can go. I love that question. And I was thinking back to 2013 when I started our run club here in Philadelphia. Part of it was I was lonely as it related to my fitness and wellness journey, and created this run club for women of all bodies, all bodies, regardless of race, pace, socioeconomic status, assigned gender at birth. It's like you belong. And that created a sense of community. A lot of folks went to become longtime friends, were in each other's weddings, completed a lot of race events together. And then during the pandemic, I became like a certified yoga teacher trainer, and I started teaching meditation. And I was like, I'm feeling lonely. A lot of us are feeling lonely during that time. And I was like, how do we kind of help be there for each other? And so it was online, but it was this thing that I wanted to try to do to help other people. And now when I think about the work in running and RIDC, a lot of what we do related to this is amplify the different groups that exist, like City Fit Girls was in Philadelphia, where there's a group called Big Girls Who Run and Crazy Girl Gang. And all these groups are starting to form because if you look at running, it's predominantly white sports, predominantly sport with a lot of skinny people, thin people, and you think that you can't afford to participate. But a lot of people, especially a lot of Black and brown folks and a lot of women, Black and brown women are participating, and they're participating in the way that feels authentic to them and helps them build connection with each other. And so for a lot of people in like running space, it is they don't see something that exists, so then they create it themselves, and then other people join behind it.
Great. For Jasper or Candace, like have either of you seen any policies or very intentional practices created to help people experience a greater sense of belonging in the spaces where you work?
Yeah, I can say that first is that, I think that one of the things that's essential, in sort of combating that epidemic of loneliness is connection, right? When we look at all kinds of different sort of mental health treatments, let's say, and I'm saying this as a LCSW, I'm a therapist by background, and you know, ultimately the thing that really helps someone get out through depression or anxiety or addiction is community and connection, having that sense of being a part of something bigger. And for a lot of folks, that thing that is bigger, it could be God, could be the universe, but it's often connected to other people. You're part of a community. We see this in recovery communities. We see this among LGBTQ communities, and we see that in our like sub communities as well, right? I was like a 90s kid, so I grew up, knowing a lot of folks who were like the circuit boys and went to certain parties that did certain things, and like that wasn't me. But for me, it's being part of a trans community, and even as I grow into that and um, sort of am able to self-define who I am, it's also finding other transmasculine folks. It's sort of being able to have the freedom to explore my own identity. Even, I've done as much transition as I think I'm going to do, but to even just be able to have a space to have that conversation. And so when we talk about a lot of the policies and things happening, especially right now, it's not just an issue in terms of access to healthcare or whether there's an MF or X on my ID, right? It's also erasing a part of who I am within a larger community. And I think that is, there's two levels. On the day-to-day logistics level, yes, it's a nightmare. On the sort of deeper heart level, there's grief that I'm, somehow being forced into a community that I don't belong to. So to be, and whether that's being told, well, Jasper, you were assigned female at birth, therefore you must have an F on your ID or your passport or whatever, which, is kind of ridiculous. Or the bathroom laws, like nobody wants me, I don't want me going into a women's bathroom. Actually, I would take that back. I do. Women's bathrooms are almost universally cleaner. I don't know what's wrong with the other men in the world, but but I just, that's not my community anymore. And I loved that community, but it's not who I am anymore. And so I think what's hard is that we see policies that are not just erasing access to things, but on a deeper level, it's taking us away from our communities. It's actually adding to that loneliness and that othering. And that's not just sad, it's also scary. And for a lot of us, it's really dangerous.
I love that you mentioned that, Jasper, that there's grief, there are things that cause sadness, there are things that are dangerous, because sometimes in conversations about joy, freedom, and belonging, I mean, people can feel a bit gaslit about the actual experiences they're having. They're like, wait a minute. I think even Candace, last week was like, wait a minute. Some of these questions are not easy to answer. And I think especially now there are people who are dealing with things like grief and like sadness. And I'm just wondering if anyone in the chat, when you arrived to this conversation, did you feel that you had to confront grief or sadness in order to even step into a conversation about joy? So I'm just curious to see if anyone felt that way, because I sense that a lot of people need to be able to name what it is they're experiencing before they can even open up a conversation about joy. And so with that, I want to talk about this concept of self-determination and the ability to name and claim yourself and exercise agency. Are there examples of that happening in your community? Candace, I'd love to hear from you about the way that you have specifically worked with the bail fund, because this is something that is connected to a system, but is also creating a sense of freedom and liberation. So it's not just about a feeling or a feel good or naming something that is internal. It is something structural that you stepped in to change. So can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, it's I had a lot to say more. I thought about it about the question before. So
Well,
I'm sort of
please
merging a
start
little bit.
there.
But
Please,
just like,
yeah.
yeah, like our work is like we're literally about freedom, like working to free people from cages by paying their ransom is what we call it. But a lot of our work, even in the very act of like processing a bail request, we are also combating isolation, which is a part of like the carceral system. Like one of the things that people like, I think like this question I thought a lot about COVID and how it really taught us a lot of hard lessons in the bail fund. Like the bail fund, we almost broke apart because of like the isolation that came with COVID. Because I tell people like we were powered by like pizza and bullshitting when we were get together to get the work done. And like both of those were gone. Like we weren't eating together and joking together as we were doing the work. And it bred a lot of like isolation and then like mistrust and stuff like that. And so I'm realizing too that's always been a part of the work that we do because part of our process is we go into the jails and do jail visits. I've been doing this for 8 years now, and I'm just remembering the first time I did go into jails. I remember when I came out, I felt like someone had beat me with a sack of potatoes. Like I no longer feel that physically in my body anymore. That spiritual thing, it manifests physically, like I hurt. But sometimes when I think about it, or I meet someone that has a particularly a rough story that reminds me of like my dad or my mom, and like I'm crying with them or whatever, that comes back again. But like part of it is that like people are starved for like community in the prison because they're not allowed visits a lot, and they're not allowed um telephone calls a lot, and they're stuck in their cells for like nearly all day. Like they might get 2 or 3 hours a day outside of their cells. And like because of COVID, when COVID happened, that there was a time when there could be no visits, not even official visit for a long time. And then like after 6 months, they started letting us in for official visits. But you cannot see your family and your friends. You could see them over a tablet, like this, a video call. And even now that like lockdown has long been over, like the COVID's still there and it's still killing people in large numbers, but like we're no longer shut down, but they still have the same policies as in the months after shutdown, being like us being let out into the wild, where people have to like sign up online, which is a really cumbersome system to get a limited number of slots to be able to visit their loved ones. And especially for women, just to be honest, they don't get many visits at all. The people who are coming down to visit people are women coming to see men who are locked up. And a lot of times, the women who are locked up are like lonely. So part of our work, us going in, is also combating that isolation, because here's like a total stranger, has no connection to you whatsoever, who's like asking you how you're doing and who's concerned about you and like letting you know that, hey, I'm fighting to get you out of this cage. And so like, yeah, part of our work is like, yeah, that physical, like we're getting someone literally free, but it's also like helping to combat that isolation even while they're still in a cage. And then when they come out, a lot of the things that we hear, I've heard, especially from the women that we built out, is that they feel very isolated once they come home and shamed of like the experience that they've had, that they've been in prison, even though a whole lot of folk in Philly have been incarcerated pretrial, or have been like a hair's breadth away from being incarcerated, or have a cousin or a neighbor who was in jail. So it's something that all of us can like know and think about, like, hey, we're connected to this, but we still feel a lot of like mistrust of people who have pretrial incarceration records. And so they find when they come home that they're viewed as a pariah. And like part of
Mm,
it is like we have like community dinners and meetings that we're trying to like ramp back up to our pre-COVID levels, where part of it is to build this community. Like you're with all these people who also can relate to where you are, or who are empathetic, and like you're in this community where you can be yourself. And then one thing we started a couple years ago is we have our Black Mamas Gala every year in May. We also do a Black Mamas Healing Retreat in August up at Glen Ford, where it's a day of like yoga, massage. We had portraits this past summer. I'm trying to get this summer us to get makeup artists and stuff to help glam people up. So something that was like really attending to people's spiritual needs, where you can get out sort of almost outside the city, go kayaking. A lot of people were like really happy about kayaking. A few people fell in the water, but it was just like a really joyous time where people really were able to like breathe and like just be in community together. And so like, yeah, like talking about policies, like the very policy of like pretrial detention, and how we continue like virtually locking people up when they come home. A lot of people on house arrest or monitors and things like that. Like it's all about a policy that's enforcing this isolation and separation. And so I think all of our work really is like helping to combat this.
mm. That's so incredible and inspiring, Candace. I hope that we can get some information about both the bailout and the wellness day that you do. They both sound just like really, really impactful. So thank you so much for that. So I really love the presentation that Kelly and Diane did at the beginning of this session, where they talked about the 6 conditions of system change, and they talked about, policy, practices, and the flow of resources being at the top. So when you talk about, the bailout, of course, there are these policies that need to be changed, and that's like a very explicit way of changing systems. But at the bottom of that triangle they presented was the mental model. And usually for the mental model, that's about the stories that we're telling. So when you talk about building empathy, one of the ways that we build empathy in our communities is to tell stories. And with the work that each of you is doing and leading, you're creating spaces for narratives to change. So I would just love to hear from you, like, what is a narrative that needs to change? And how is your work contributing to narrative change? Jasper,
I'm like me.
okay.
I'm trying so hard to make space. But man, this is such a good one. I think that let me start with what the narrative is that we're fighting all the time, right? Is that, and I think I don't know if it's because I was born in 1980 and so my whole life I've been living with the HIV epidemic. But from my perspective and from talking to some elders, it's like when HIV first really came out, it was just devastating our communities. And then, we started to get a handle of it on in the early 90s, and medications were available. And but there was also this burgeoning um, interest in research and what are risk behaviors and who is high risk. And of course, I think that queer youth, especially Black youth and trans youth, have become almost like pigeonholed into being like this high risk group. And I'm not going to sit here and pretend like, being Black and trans and a young person doesn't come with a lot of risks, especially in the US. But I think what happened is that we started to think of these particular youth as problems to be managed, right? They aren't just young people who do risky things. They became risks that had to be mitigated. Their identities start to get debated, and they're not seen as whole people anymore. And I think that, to be honest, I think that as a society, like in the U.S., we tend to think of youth and children as not whole people, and I think that's really unfortunate because they teach me all the time. Um, and so I think that this narrative really just frames the idea of a young person through a lens of like scarcity and fear and deficit and risk. And the truth is that what we get to see in LGBTQ youth at the attic are that they are the experts of their own lives. And they are incredible. Like I used to think like, oh, we're going to teach youth how to advocate for themselves in a medical appointment or whatever it is. And sometimes that's true, but I am constantly floored by the ways that they advocate for themselves, in the ways that they tell us what they need. Um, and so what we know is that when we give them a space of affirmation, of resources, when we give them, frankly, I remember as a teen, I used to say that I used to be like, Mom, I need space to fuck up. And I'm sorry for my language. I'm not really sorry for my language because that's exactly what I would say as a 15-year-old, right? I needed the freedom to mess up because that is really what opportunity is, right? We all mess up. We've all done something wrong in our lives. Right? Nobody is perfect. But what opportunity and resources really is, other than, capitalism, is this leeway, this extra space, so that if you mess up, you can learn from it and try again. And what we learn is that the folks who are, what we used to call like sort of high risk, is because they don't have as many opportunities to mess up. And that means they
Mm,
don't have the same number of opportunities to learn and change and try again. And the
mm,
pressure of that
mm,
is just, it's a joy killer, right?
mm,
And so I think of it as joy should be seen as a birthright, right? Our queer people, all of us, whether we're young or old, queer or not, honestly, like we all have a right to joy. And it shouldn't be held over our heads as like this carrot on a stick. It's not a reward for being resilient during times of adversity, right? I I refuse to wait for the current wave of adversity to end for me to find my joy.
Mm, that
They
is
don't get to
so
have that.
powerful. So powerful, Jasper. I feel like I need that on a t-shirt. And I just want to invite the folks in the room to also weigh in. What is a narrative that needs to change? What narrative are you changing? Maybe you can type it in the chat. You might be journaling. Maybe you're just thinking about a narrative like, hey, wait, I hear that story so often, but maybe we just need to create more space, or maybe these people have been targeted with a certain narrative that is untrue at this point in our current reality. So please contribute, because the more we see here, the more we can take that into conversation. With that, Kiera, was there anything for you?
Yeah, I love this question. The for I think that a lot of narratives are that we hear a lot in our spaces, that running is not for me, um, for 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 various reasons. Again, body sizes, racial demographic, etc. And we are trying our best to, it's like not even try to change narratives, but like just start new ones. And just like those are not exceptions, those are the norms. So, like for us, it's how do we get more people to see themselves as part of this sport? I'm thinking about we were just in LA this past weekend, unfortunately. Anyway, it was 70 degrees, but we were just in LA with one of our brand partners, A6, and it was a women's summit. And we were able to bring 5 people with us from Philadelphia. And um, for 2 of them, it was their first time doing a 5K ever. Never done it, never thought about it. But just that experience alone, like they felt like they could see themselves doing it, and they did it, and they raved about it after. For one of the people we brought with us, they haven't been on a plane in 15 years. And there's just these different stories from that weekend where I think, before that weekend, they would not have seen themselves on a plane or going to participate in a movement-based activity, et cetera. So, and now they're sharing these stories with their communities. And now that's a narrative for them to go forward with and for us to help amplify. And then I just real quick, I really wanted to take a moment to go back to a comment by Denise in the comment in the chat, where at the end of her comment, she said, "We are forced to find joy in disasters. If we don't do it, if we don't, it can really tear a community down." And I really, really love that. RIDC was started after the murder of Ahmaud Arbery, after his run while he's in Georgia. And then also you had George Floyd and Breonna Taylor in the same year. And the first 2, 3 years of building RIDC, I mean, my thyroid popped out, like my ankles were swollen. There was so much that was happening by how much I was trying to give and react to and respond to and hold together for so many people. And then it was at one point where me and my team, we had a conversation. One of my team members said, we can't afford to burn out. Like our cause needs us to be in this longer. We can't afford to hit a brick wall. And it was a really important moment for us to remind ourselves of how to self-regulate, how to decide when to be the one at the beginning of the fire, like when to be the one that runs to the fire, when to be the one to make the calls, when to be the one to write the stories behind the scenes, and really understand that there's different roles that we can play at different times when so much around us is chaotic and it feels like it's always that way. And so just trying to remind ourselves to uh to give ourselves some grace and permission to go, this is how I can show up. And it may look different than how you did in a similar scenario 3 years ago, but it's your best. My favorite quote is, "You're doing your best and your best is getting better." So I just wanted to hold that.
I love that. I lead Love Now Media, which is a media company, and for several years we did news. So we were just, running into the fire with love. And last year I could not do with everything going on. I'm like, I cannot run into these narratives not like this with real love. And so we kind of pivoted. So I truly understand that. And I would actually love to talk more about freedom. Um, we're coming up on 250 years of our founding of our wonderful country of the United States of America. Freedom is a part of, how we define ourselves. And as we've seen in the comments, there are a lot of people right now who are not experiencing a sense of freedom. And so, if you could each just describe, how would you assess the state of freedom in your community? Like, that's like geographic or otherwise, like you like locally or like where you work. How are people feeling about freedom? And I think, Candace, because of what your work is, it's like literal freedom. And I wonder if you could speak to some of the other pillars of change, like how is your work contributing to freedom in terms of relationships and connection or power dynamics? Whereas like with you, Jasper and Kiera, I wonder if you could just talk about, how your work is contributing to freedom and how would you assess the state of freedom in your community? Same thing to everyone on the call. Please type in the chat.
Yeah, like, yeah, how would I assess the state of freedom? Pretty poor, but I guess that was what everyone would say. And it's been pretty poor for a long time. It's not something that's new because of this current like fascist regime. It's like been pretty poor for a long time. And then like a lot of communities are just getting worse now. And like we just are meeting today assessing our support policy, and we're finding that, you know, it's just part of the people being able to be free, even to like participate in the work of like ending cash bail and sharing their stories. Has we've always know that we have to help make sure that they have food on the table so they have a room in their brain and their mind to think about these other things besides just how to survive. And it's getting harder and harder to do that because there's less and less resources out there, and it's like the resources we have are really limited. So that's it's been really hard to like move that pendulum in a positive direction.
Mm,
Then and I think like one thing we also did recently was going over our budget, and like we've decided that we wanted to like in some cases triple our budget items when it's come to what we spend on like events and meetings and stuff, because we want to do more of that, having spaces for community to be able to like provide people with food and transportation to get there so they can be in that space together, and like, to be able to have a moment where they can be in a celebratory mood, or like in a mood where a place where they can actually think about how do we actually push the pendulum towards like ending cash bail when it seems like it's that's a very hard like thing to do right now, more
mhm,
so than it
mhm.
was before. So yeah, maybe I don't know. I just can't get like past the whole assessing the state of like freedom in the area question. Yeah.
Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you for that. Jasper or Kiera? You're so polite. You're
Oh
so
my gosh,
polite.
it's so funny. Um, I'd say, I think that Candace, what you were saying really made me think back to a talk I went to about the difference between freedom and liberation, right?
Mm,
Freedom is like, for a lot of your folks is literally getting out of the cage, right? But liberation is when we don't have that system. And I love what the Community Bill Fund is doing towards that liberation. I think in our community, um, you know, trans youth in particular are in the crosshairs. We are very much literally the scapegoat. Um, and there's so much misinformation. There's so much hate. If you if you knew nothing about trans youth and only watched, mainstream action news, you would think that like kids are going to kindergarten and getting a sex change operation in a drive-through, and like it's all taxpayer funded. Which I mean, maybe for some folks that is the dream of liberation, but like I think that what we're seeing is this moment where we enjoyed a period recently where there was freedom, there was more access to gender affirming care, there were more policies being placed at workplaces and in cities and in towns that allowed us to go to a bathroom that was appropriate for us. And I think of that as like freedom. Like that's nice. Thank you for the freedom of letting me use a bathroom. Liberation is when people don't care, right? Liberation is when I get to be whoever I am. I can, be someone who identifies as trans, and maybe in some circles, like it doesn't even matter, right? Like we don't even need those labels anymore. And we are so far from that. Um, but I hold hope for that because I have to. And, I think that if we find ways towards that liberation, then it's also, we realize that it doesn't take away from anyone else, right? If, I think what we're seeing, and it's just so thinly veiled, is this narrative that trans folks are somehow, um, we're threatening the reality or the like as if there are these hard and fast rules around gender. And liberation is saying like, hey, you know what? No, those rules are only there if we make them, right? And so, how do we help both hold both of those things where we are making space to ensure that there aren't disparities amongst folks because of gender and sex and race and all of those other things,
Mhm.
while at the same time making space for everyone to be our complex selves.
Mm, mm,
That was good.
beautiful.
Yeah. I'll be quick. That was
Okay.
good, Jasper. I'm like, yeah. Uh, for us, freedom of movement is extremely important, and a lot of times it may be men or like elite athletes who may go, all you need is a pair of shoes and go right out the door. That's all you need. And it's like, for a lot of women, you need time, you need money, you have a lot of different variables happening in your body. And so it's never lost on us that there's freedom, but freedom is conditional for a lot of people. And so for us, a lot of things that we try to do is we're not just leading with, our name is Running Industry Diversity Coalition, but we're saying, how do we get more people to enter the sport? And we're not starting with come do a run. It's that's just creating even more barriers for a lot of people. So some things we think about is like, what does a walk run look like? What does some other movement look like that when you have consistency with that, then you may, see if you're interested in running. I know I was never into running. I had asthma, a bigger body. I was like, there's no way that you can catch me running. And then when I did it, I didn't do it till college actually, but then when I did it, I stuck with it. So it's been almost 20 years of sticking with it in the way that I participate. And so just trying to like remind people, especially women, that like um, freedom to move is like what that means for you. It could mean walks, taking walks, more walks, taking meetings on walks. It could mean the play that you do with your family and friends and kids, or just different things like that. And know that counts, because it does. And so that's just something that like just comes up for us in terms of freedom, allowing people to define it for themselves, but then we can be that vehicle for resources and opportunities to help them continue.
Mm. That's incredible. And I see a comment here from Tinley Bank that is really, recapping liberation is others seeing my humanity and me seeing others' humanity and not buying into narratives that say some are more human than others. That's so beautifully stated. But I also love this comment, safe places to run, because sometimes people don't feel safe having joy. You know, there are some people who don't feel like it's safe to be joyful walking down the street. You know, as a woman or as a non-binary person, to simply be walking down a street joyfully can feel unsafe because you have maybe let your guard down or have invited someone to speak with you and you don't want to be spoken to, you know. So I would love to hear more about and I especially want to hear from the people in the room. Where do you feel safe to have joy? Where do you feel safe in terms of, you know, your sense of belonging? Where do you feel safe enough to let that guard down and connect with other people? So I'd love to hear from any of you who would be up for speaking to that as well.
Also, I think I would admit that as it relates to movement and safety, I don't run in my neighborhood.
Mm,
I don't see people running. I just moved there like 3 years ago, and I went out a few times and I was like, I don't like being the only person I see running, and I didn't build a community to run with me. So I might walk 20 minutes or drive 5 minutes to a nearby place where I can do it. And so it's tough because a lot of times a lot of us have to overcompensate to in order to feel that joy and movement. And so I think there's no one size fits all solution there, but I think we do have some examples and references to share with people so that they don't feel like they have to start from scratch of figuring out where to begin.
hmm Great. Jasper or Candace?
Yeah, I guess the question about like where do we feel safe right now?
Hmm
Um, and this is a positive thing yet or not, because I've been talking to my therapist about how I need to like expand my community further. But I feel safe when I'm in organizing spaces. So like one, of course, the Bell Fund is that's like my life. But like I think especially now I'm part of these like no ice groups, you know? And so instead of feeling like panic or like more anxiety about like depression, like being in a space where we can talk about, okay, what do we have to work with? What can we do to protect ourselves and our neighbors? Um, it actually makes me feel like safe, and able to find some like relief from like the oppression that's happening by like being like focusing on like, okay, well, what can I do? How can I be there for my community? And so, and that's even rolling into the Bell Fund, like us being able to also show up in those spaces to be like, okay, as a mutual aid group, what can we offer and do to sort of like help like protect our community? And that's been very helping to deal a lot with the anxiety and like um frankly the fear, which is, you know, how they want us to be immobilized by fear. That's the whole point. So yeah, organizing spaces right now is where I feel safety.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that. Jasper, did you have anything for that one?
I mean, for me, I'm an extrovert, so I think community is always where I find safety. I think what's interesting is a few years ago when I entered into this role at the attic, I felt like my community both expanded and shrank at the same time. It
Mm,
expanded in the sense that, I joke about it, but I'm like professionally queer in a lot of ways, which is great. I love it. And I get to see a lot of folks in community. And also it shrank because now I'm representing so much more than myself.
mhm,
Um, and so I learned like I had to be a little bit more careful. And I think, with the last presidential election, I got scared because I have a family and two youngins and who are amazing and they're going to change the world. Um, and, so where I feel safe has shifted. And I think that what has helped me weather that is learning to be okay with those shifts and those pivots.
Mm.
That this is temporary. Like that for right now, this is where my safety zones are.
Mhm.
But also, I think somebody had posted or had commented about feeling most safe with their daughter, and I so relate to that. My kids are 5 and almost 8, and you know I feel so safe when I can just play pretend with them. I love playing pretend, which is great because my partner doesn't love doing that. And so we have played all kind. I mean, we have been big cats who escaped a zoo. We have been, but there's this joy in being able to play in a way that like you get to make your own rules. Like that's what playing pretend is so beautiful about. You get to make your own rules and you get to explore like what could the world look like.
Mm. That is so beautiful. I mean, one of the things I would love to talk about, just as we're thinking about possibility, what could the world look like, is the gender wealth gap. So we talked a lot about gender on the call and gender as it relates to joy, but also just thinking about wealth, and having access and having resources and thinking about systems change. And, one of the conditions is to have the flow of resources, flow in a way where people have what they need, where communities have what they need systemically. And as we know, there have been a lot of policies that have like kind of, shut down resources or have held up, access to things, whether it's healthcare or therapy or education. So I wonder from each of you, are there any calls to action for for changing policies that would allow more resources to flow to certain communities, to certain issues, to certain solutions that the communities you work in have identified? That was a long question. So let me know if you need me to take it back or if you got that. But, you know, how can the money help? How to solve some of these problems? And, what is a call to action there?
Yeah, I think one way thinking about like funders and people who hold resources, um, one thing that could help is funding and supporting more like third spaces in
Mm,
communities where people can gather that's not related to like buying or selling or school or work. So that people can sort of gather and build those community networks and resources. There are not a lot of places where people can do that nowadays, to be able to like meet the neighbors and other people in the community, maybe to like find connections where they can actually share resources and support one another. And that might be quite purposeful where there's no longer many spaces like that. And these virtual spaces that did exist, in a
mm.
while they have been like completely like co-opted and corrupted, like thinking about what happened to Twitter and TikTok and whatnot. So it's like I feel like that is an area where if funders wanted to invest, since they seem to be more scared about like funding groups like the bail fund to get people out of the cages and stuff like that. I mean, that's something that sounds nice to do that will actually, I think, help build community.
Are there any specific third spaces that you want to name in this call that maybe should receive more funding? Or are there any ideas that you're dreaming up for a third space?
Well, I mean, there's like the basics, but there are spaces that everyone knows about, like our libraries and community centers, which like is
Mm,
always a constant fight in the city to get them properly funded so they could be like open more than 3 days a week or whatever, or like open on the weekends. And like those are places where people can gather, especially people who don't have any resources. They're lifesavers, and so we
mhm,
need more of those. But I even think about groups that do a lot of, it's not like a space per se, but like an event or like something that's bringing people together that is like that dirt space. Like I'm thinking like groups like Center Speak and like Spiral P with their peoplehood parades. Like they're creating these spaces where community members can come together to like view or discuss art, to build art, and to like
Mm.
use their voices in like a really beautiful way, like the Bell Fund. It's so crazy. I've lived in Philly like over 20 years now. This was the first time I went to the People Who Parade, like this past fall.
Wow.
Like amaze balls. And I'm like, where actually lived around the corner from the workshop and I didn't do this before, but just sort of like just realizing how, oh yeah, this is an amazing thing that our community has done now for I think they said it's 30 years or something. It's been a long time, but like focusing more on like also like supporting groups like that, I think is important because it's when it comes to like the arts or even the library, some people think of those things as sort of like unnecessary or ancillary, but I think they really are vital to actually building a strong community and sustaining our community.
Thank you so much for that. Great. Thank you. Thank you. Jasper or Kiera?
I can go. Like, how you gonna go after Candace? That was so good. Uh, so for our organization, right, to start the way we did in terms of racial justice organization and running, we talked a lot about generational wealth and how can we help with racial justice from the lens of generational wealth. And we knew that if you ask anybody what generational wealth meant to them, it can mean so many different things. And so of like how to achieve it. And so for us, we said, what does it look like for us to be helpful in employment and ownership? The running industry has so many jobs. Our most of our partner organizations, like some of the bigger brands, has like a combined 5,000 jobs available right now. And a lot of the benefits and exposure and experiences you get to have, um, you don't really see in many other industries. Um, and so our organization is unique because I like to say we're at the center because we're trying to bring all these people in. And then we're also working with the brands to hold them accountable. And we know we're looking for progress, not necessarily perfection. But when we hold them accountable and we say, we need you to adhere to X, Y, and Z standards in order to even get featured on our jobs board, in order to have access to our community. So things like y'all can simplify the job descriptions, you know. We don't need all
Mhm.
that. Um, like you don't need a degree for a lot of these roles. You don't need to have running experience. There's just there's so many ways that people can like participate and benefit in this industry that has not been clearly communicated or more easily communicated to as many people as possible. So we work to bridge those gaps. As far as ownership, we said, well, we can count on hand how many BIPOC owned running stores exist in this country. And so
Mhm.
we launched a pilot called Run the Block with Brooks Running with one of our partners to open that store. And
Wow.
we launched an application and we said to open a running store, it's like I don't know how many people would apply. We hope we get like 20 applications. This was a year ago, 2 years ago, we got 150, I'm sorry, 100 applications, 110 applications. And the winner is in PG County, Maryland. This duo, Carol and Jesse Holland, and they actually just opened their store last week. So we have just put online a Black-owned running store in Maryland. And everybody's welcome to the open house, the reception next month. And so we just constantly think of these things where we have all where we're partnering with these companies who have all the resources. So we're like,
Mhm.
give us
Mhm.
the resources. We know exactly where to put them. And then at the same time, we're also going, well, where are we bringing these people into? Let's talk
Mhm.
about that and let's do some accountability here. And so that's how we think about like where we can help in terms of wealth access and running.
Thank you. There's a question from Joanna. Joanna says, what have been your best tools as organizers to find resources for your communities and organizations? Jasper, I'd love to hear from you on that one. What have been your best tools to find
Ooh,
resources?
tools. I want to walk it back one step and to start with, as if we're going to think about wealth beyond capitalism, beyond
Mm,
money, we have to think about resources beyond money. And don't get me wrong, we all need money. Every organization, like we all need money to do what we do. But there are also so many resources that are given to us that are not necessarily money. Like there are so many ways that, even within a nonprofit, we get to change that narrative, right? So, a few years back, we shifted. We used to have like our board members used to have a give or get, right? Every board member had to give or get a certain amount each year that we loosely held people to, right? But at
Mhm.
the same time, we would have them sign this commitment form saying, like, I'm going to give this much money, but I'm also going to do this with my time and this with my knowledge. And I was like, no, 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 we can't do that. First of all, we had some people who could give 10 times that amount in a blink of an eye, and other folks where like that give or get amount was it's hard, right? And so, and it's hard in a very capitalist society not to think of that as being better than or less than. And so we said, no, we're not doing that. The board as a whole has a lump sum that they contribute to in some kind of way. And it's actually been more successful if you're going to look at it from a purely financial standpoint. But when I think about resources, it is so much more. Lots of folks will email us and say, "Hey, how can I volunteer or something?" I love volunteers. I wish our building had enough space for volunteers. Don't worry, we're working on something that you'll find out. But um, we there are so many other resources, right? There are ways, we have companies who are like, "Hey, I have a Pride employee group, right? How can I help support?" And I'm like, you know what? I love this. And like, we're not trekking 30 youth from Philadelphia Center City out to, Collegeville or whatever, like an hour or something away. But and you probably aren't going to trek your way into Center City either. So, but do a letter writing campaign, write us some
Mhm.
Valentines and like affirmation cards, do things, give in ways that are frankly a lot of times more meaningful. Don't get me wrong, still cut the check. I love getting checks, but because that's a way that I can also help filter that and like show appreciation with our staff, right? Because
Mm.
we all live in capitalism,
Right, right. I,
but
I I
the
love
youth come for
this.
so much more.
Yeah, this is so important though, Jasper. And I love this Maven collective definition of wealth that Women's Way uses because it's not about, being a unicorn or having a million dollars or anything like that. These are, definitions that are about, having a vibrant community, having relationships with family networks, people where you can feel spiritually whole. And so I think there is a form of wealth that we can be generating that is sometimes overlooked. We all talk about having belonging, but are we tracking how many places where we feel belonging as something that contributes to our wealth? Are we tracking the interactions that we have with people where we are building those connections as an accumulation of something that is contributing to a form of wealth? And so there is this incredible organization I learned about called the People's Media Record, and they're starting this huge time banking campaign where it's about people, giving skills to each other and tracking the time. So, philanthropists and funding organizations are often talking about funding cuts, but they're like, how can we, the people, get together and add value to each other? So even with all of the folks who are on the chat, if someone said something that resonates with you or that sparked an idea, hey, maybe like tag them a note and ask for their LinkedIn or their social media and follow them. Really make connections because that is a way of generating wealth and expanding your community. Create, even if it's one connection, that connection could lead to access to another space or some kind of a mobilizing for some kind of an activity or to change a system. So I think it's very important to pull out the non-capitalist perspective, when we're thinking about building wealth. So as we are getting close to the end of our conversation here, I would love to hear from each of you what you've learned about designing solutions with the people who are impacted by the problems that your organization solves. Some people, want to design up here and think they have the solution and give it to the people, and the people are like, "What is this?" So all of you are working directly in community to design solutions. I'd love to hear about that. And then if you could just throw on what is giving you absolute joy these days. Is it a book, a TV show, a podcast, anything?
Right, let's start. So, like I mentioned with the Bell Fund, the Community Bell Fund, like communities are named for a reason. Because we want it to like be community centered and also be led by and lead with folk who are formerly incarcerated or whose family members are people formerly incarcerated. So like we started out like doing like every month we had a Saturday community meeting where we saved our decisions for that meeting. So we would do a report back and have lunch and the feedback from people who would come in to like add to our work. And as we've grown, that's sort of morphed in ways, but we always have about at least 30% or three of our sort of like 12 seats on our like core organizing team held by formerly incarcerated people. Right
Mhm.
now on our staff, we have three formerly incarcerated people who are who actually do the work and who we all make the decisions sort of like right now we're a horizontal organization, so we all have like equal voting rights. And so I sort of act as the ED, but it's really just sort of helping to like coalesce consensus and like push things forward. So like that whole like being led by the folks that we have actually bailed out and the people who we serve. Because also like all of our organizations, we're like right now, I think we're like 100% POC, like about like 80% African American, and then we have someone who's like Puerto Rican and like few like uh Arab, like South Asian people who are involved, and like also very like I don't know the numbers now because there's been shifting, but we also have a lot of people who are like queer, and then like we have some trans like men who are part of our group. So like we that has always been our value to like the groups who are most impacted by cash bail have to be at this at the table, and not just at the table, but actually like leading the table. So
Mhm.
that's been something that's been important from the start. And what's been giving me joy, my mama got me into K dramas. And so right now I there's just service called Rakuten, I think. And I've been watching five different K dramas at once. Completely stupid, body switching, people reborn and stuff, but that's giving me some joy. Just being like, you know what? I'll just relax, look at the pretty men, the crazy situations, and that's something that helps keep me like centered now.
I love that. I'm gonna definitely have to look for that. I don't know if it's my thing, but I know my kid was totally into it. So that's super cool. The name of the group, Julie, is the People's Media Record. They are doing a time banking initiative, and there was another. Tinley is looking to be on a board, so like let's come together, community. Jasper. Maybe Tinley can have my old spot, you know? So, for Jasper and Kiera, yeah. So, can you answer the question about co-designing with people impacted by, the issues you're solving and what is bringing you absolute joy these days? And we just have 4 minutes before we get to our closing. So, if you could take 2 minutes each.
I'm gonna be real fast.
Okay.
There are a couple of things that I really love about the way the attic is structured, and one of them is that we have former youth who are now on our staff and on director levels. So, you know, it's a beautiful thing because they also carry with them that historic knowledge of what the attic was like during their period. And then we have brought back our Youth Leadership Council, which is 10 youth, five who ideally it's five who are under 18 and five who are 18 and over. And of those 10, two of them are also selected to be board representatives. And so we really try to find ways that it's both we get to teach youth what the how the sausage is made, but also they get to teach us what doing right by them looks like. And I love that. So
Thank you. That's awesome. Kiera?
I wrote a note, so I was also succinct. The you know, RIDC, it's a national nonprofit, but we're based in Philly. And we have the benefit of having both like this big community of folks who are looking for resources or looking to offer their expertise. And then again, we have like the industry where we can be the bridge between the resources. And so co-designing for us in a lot of ways looks like experienced runners giving back to new runners, like helping coach them or support them in some way. Um, co-designing also looks like um, our community helping us inform opportunities, like how we announce them, where to release them, and how to make sure that these resources are stretched far and wide. I'll give a sneak peek here. You heard it here first. We are going to announce hundreds of scholarships, movement-based scholarships to get people moving their bodies in whatever way that looks like for them. And that's really exciting. And a lot of people in our community will be helping us inform what partnerships to explore and how to reach people to make sure that they are aware of this when it comes. And it's totally free for them. They don't have to worry about anything, but just to see what movement looks like for them again. And then in terms of joy. Professionally, it's going to always be people coming back and saying, thanks to RIDC, I now have my dream job in the industry, or I was working at 7-Eleven. Now I see myself helping design sneakers, and that's something that's a creative interest of mine. Or, I know one in particular, she's Philly based. She was sitting on Black Moms Who Walk. She's a new mom, and she's just sitting on it. But then because she does a lot of work helping us on social media and social media and different things, she's officially launched it. So blackmomswhowalk.com is live for anyone who's interested. Personally, it is kids as well. It is my nephews. I just love just simple, just being so like easygoing and simple and just having fun and going, the biggest problem for you is something on Miss Rachel's, show, like saying, repeating something from Miss Rachel um, something simple. That's bringing me a lot of joy. I was just yesterday, was MLK Day or the day before?
2 days
I don't even
ago.
know what. I was speaking to 100 high school student athletes, and these young women were just eager and excited and engaged to talk about like leadership and what that looks like on and off the field. So just like making sure I can spend time with youth more and young people more brings me great joy.
Amazing. Well, I want to bring Kelly back in to close us out. But as Kelly is giving us our final word, I just want to invite everyone in the chat to just put some energy in that chat. What is bringing you joy? What do you want to bring you joy? Like we have 30 people on this call that, are still here. Before you go off, please just, put a word, something that is giving you inspiration, helping you to feel free, a space where you're feeling safe, and something that's bringing you joy. And just share that. That's our way of building wealth on this call today. And so I want to thank you all for joining us. Kelly shared. Can you come back and close us out, please?
I almost don't want to close us out. Listen, I want to see what's in the chat, what people are going to say in the chat. I want to keep the convo going, but all right. A big thank you to you, Joss, for your masterful facilitating and holding space for us in this conversation. We appreciate you, and definitely big thank you to our panelists for sharing all of your wisdom and insights. And maybe recommendations for K-dramas. Interesting. All right, I have just a couple of things to tell you, or a few things rather. Please take the survey that's linked in the chat. We want to know what you liked, what you want more of, and how you'd like us to support you in the coming year. On this slide here, you'll see a QR code. So at the Gender Wealth Summit, we started to talk about the social safety net, what we were experiencing, how we were navigating, and what sort of stability and opportunity we wanted for ourselves and for our neighbors. So we decided to come together and form our own advocacy community where we can learn and work collectively. So if this sounds like something that you might be interested in, I encourage you to scan the QR code or go to our website for access to join the advocacy community. And also, you should know that this year is our birthday. This year, Women's Way is celebrating our 50th anniversary alongside the nation's 250th. And we're honoring the critical role all gender marginalized people have played and continue to play in shaping our region and pushing for a better future. So be sure to check out our website and newsletter because we have a ton of in-person and virtual opportunities for us to celebrate and connect throughout the year. So thank you for joining us tonight. Big thank you again to our moderator and panelists, and you all have a wonderful evening.
I love that you probably don't know your screen is sharing, and I love that you pulled up the running store that we opened. That's the run store in PG County. I love that. Haraka.
Can't seem to avoid it. Good night, everyone.
Good night.